You are too old to handle this, Joelle. Just step aside and let the younger ones take over. Those words from my daughter-in-law landed harder than any broken pane of glass had ever cut my hands in 51 years of working with light and lead. I smiled and nodded that morning, quiet as a held breath, but what I did in the 3 days that followed left my entire family stunned into silence. I am so glad you are here with me today. Stay with me all the way to the end of this story and tell me in the comments what state you are watching from, because I want to see just how far this reaches across the country. At 71 years old, I never once imagined I would be told I was too frail, too dated, too far past my prime to do the very thing that had made me who I was for more than 4 decades. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where all of it began on the 22nd of December, exactly 3 days before Christmas, in the town of Cedar Glen, Minnesota, tucked into the frozen bend of the St. Croix River Valley. Snow had fallen most of the night, and the light coming through my studio windows was that pale blue color you only get in deep winter when the whole world seems to be holding still. It was barely 7 in the morning. I was not expecting anyone. I heard the front door open before I heard the voice, and I knew from the crisp click of expensive boots on my old wood floors exactly who had let herself in with the spare key I had handed over last Christmas in a moment of foolish warmth. "Joelle, are you up?" My daughter-in-law Britt called out from the entryway in that particular tone she used when she had already decided something and was only informing me of it. I set down the ornament I had been holding, a small blown glass star I had made by hand the week before, and wiped my palms on the leather apron I had worn through more winters than I could count. Warren had stitched a new strap onto it for me the year before he passed, his big, careful fingers working the needle at the kitchen table, while I teased him for being slower than a Sunday. In the studio, I called back, keeping my voice soft and open, even as something in my chest pulled tight. At 71, I had learned to trust my own instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me that a surprise visit at dawn on a Tuesday 3 days before Christmas was not going to be pleasant. She swept into my studio like weather rolling off the river, all sharp lines and forward motion, wrapped in a long wool coat, the color of fresh cream that likely cost more than a month of my pension. Her pale hair was pulled back so tight it seemed to sharpen her whole face, and her mouth was set in that thin, flat line that meant she had come to deliver a decision, not to have a conversation. Behind her, looking as though he wished the floor would open and take him, was my youngest son, Theo. My baby, the last of my 3 children, 42 years old now, and somehow unable to visit his own mother without his wife arranging the whole thing first. "Morning, Mom," Theo said barely above a whisper, giving me a quick one-armed hug that felt more like an apology than an embrace. I had been awake since 5, as I had every morning that week, working out in the studio my late husband had built for me off the back of the house. The room looked the way it always did in the days before Christmas, which is to say it looked like joy had exploded across every surface. Sheets of colored glass leaned in their racks, ruby and amber, and the deep river green that had become my signature over the years. My cutting tools and my grozing pliers were laid out on the bench where Warren had planed the wood smooth by hand. Half-finished panels caught the pale morning and threw soft coins of color onto the floorboards. On the long shelf above the workbench sat the ornaments, dozens of them, each one blown and painted by me, the same ones my grandchildren hung on the tree every single year while they argued over who got to place the star. The whole house smelled of pine and wood smoke and the cinnamon I had simmering on the stove. At least it did until Britt walked in and somehow made the very air feel colder. "Joelle," she began, and I noticed as I always did that she never once called me Mom the way my other children and their spouses did. Always Joelle, as if keeping that formal distance between us was some small piece of power she was not willing to give up. "We need to have a serious talk about Christmas." I was standing at my bench sorting the last of the ornaments into their tissue paper nests, the same star pattern I had been making since before she was born. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "What is on your mind? Are you worried about the little ones getting underfoot in the kitchen? It is not about the kitchen." She pulled out the tall stool by my workbench, the one with the wobble in its leg that Warren had always meant to fix and never did, and she sat down on it the way a person sits at the head of a boardroom table. "It is about the entire event. Theo and I have been discussing it at length," she went on, "and we have reached some important decisions about how this year is going to be handled." The way she said the word handled made my hands go still in the tissue paper. Not hosted, not celebrated. Handled. as if my family Christmas were a shipment to be routed or a problem to be solved by someone with the proper credentials. Decisions, I said carefully, glancing past her to Theo, who had found something outside the frosted window suddenly worth all of his attention. Britt lifted her phone and began scrolling through what looked like a set of detailed notes. The woman had prepared an agenda for my Christmas. First, we need to talk about the aesthetic, she said, her voice sliding into the smooth lecturing tone she must have used on the junior staff at her company. This handmade homespun approach you have going here is, and I mean this kindly, very dated. Theo has told you about the launch. I have not heard a word about any launch, I said. She talked straight over me the way she always did. My brand is at a real turning point this season. Hollow & Pine is about to move from a boutique operation into national retail. I have a buyer flying in, an actual buyer from a major chain, and she is going to be here on Christmas Day to see the collection presented in a real home, a real family setting, styled and photographed properly. This is the single most important moment of my career. Joelle and I cannot. I will not let it happen in a room full of, she waved one manicured hand at my shelves, at my ornaments at 41 years of my life, in a room full of craft fair clutter. I felt the floor tilt just slightly beneath me. You invited a business buyer to our family Christmas, I said, without asking me. We are not asking, Britt said, and her voice cooled another few degrees. We are letting you know. This is a networking opportunity that could change everything for Theo and me and the children. You do want what is best for your grandchildren, do you not? The question sat in the air like a trap with its jaws already open. Any answer but yes would make me the selfish one, the difficult old woman standing in the way of a young family's future. Of course I want what is best for them, I said slowly. But Britt, I have hosted Christmas in this house every single year since 1983. This is where Nate and Corinne and Theo grew up. Piper has hung that star on the tree every year since she could walk. Piper is 7, Britt said with a small dismissive breath. She will adapt far more easily than you seem able to. Which brings me to my next concern. She swiped to a fresh screen. I have hired a full styling and catering team out of the Twin Cities. Everything will be curated to match the brand palette, but warm neutrals, natural greenery, nothing loud, nothing. She paused, searching for a gentle word and not finding one, nothing cluttered. The event will be at our house in Birchwood Ridge, where I can control the setting. The team arrives at 2, guests at 5, dinner at 7. The whole thing wraps by 9, which I know is well past your usual bedtime. My usual bedtime, I repeated. Britt, I am 71, not 7, which is exactly why we are trying to be considerate, she said as if I had proven her point for her. And you can absolutely still be involved in a way that suits you. You could greet people at the door. You could arrange some fresh pine on the mantel. Small things, nothing that would tax you. And when the photographs are being taken, she said this part lightly, as though it were nothing at all. When the photographs are being taken, it might be best if you simply relaxed in the other room, so the family part of the day is not confused with the professional part. There it was. Underneath all the talk of my age and my aching bones and my safety, there was the truth of it plain as glass. She was not protecting me from anything. She was embarrassed by me. By my studio, by my old tools, by the ornaments I had blown by my own breath, by everything about me that could not be styled to match a color palette. Tight. I set down the star I was holding very gently because I did not trust what my hands might do if I held it any longer. And if I say no, I asked. If I tell you I would like to host Christmas the way I always have in my own home with my own family. Britt's expression went flat and cold, every trace of that pretend concern gone in an instant. Then we host at Birchwood Ridge without you, and the rest of the family comes to where the actual celebration is happening. It is your choice, Joelle. But I need final numbers by this afternoon. She stood smoothing her coat and looked around my studio one last time with something close to distaste. Theo, she said we should go. My son finally lifted his eyes to mine, and I saw the shame in them, and I saw too that the shame was not going to be enough to make him speak. Mom, he said quietly, it is one Christmas. And she is right, you do look tired after these big days. Maybe it would be good for you just this once to rest and let someone else carry it. For once, I said, as if I had not carried it gladly for 41 years. He had no answer for that. He never did. They let themselves out the way they had let themselves in, and the door closed and the cinnamon on the stove had gone bitter and dry. I stood alone in the studio Warren built for me, surrounded by colored glass and the pale blue winter light, and for a long moment, I could not move at all. Then I walked on legs that suddenly felt every one of their 71 years into the dining room, and I opened the low cabinet where I kept the albums. The one labeled Christmas 1983 to 2024 was worn soft at the corners from 4 decades of hands opening it. I sat down at the long table where 41 Christmas dinners had been served, and I turned to the first page. There was Warren Young and broad-shouldered in 1983 holding up a lopsided homemade wreath and grinning like he had hung the moon. There was Nate at 3 and little Corinne in a high chair with frosting in her hair, and years later the first blurry photo of Theo red-faced and brand new asleep against my shoulder on his first Christmas morning. Page after page after page. The year Nate shipped out and we kept a candle lit in the window the whole season. The last Christmas before Warren got sick when we did not yet know, and we laughed so loud the neighbors could hear. His final Christmas 2 years ago when he was too weak to stand, but insisted on being wheeled to the head of the table so he could say grace one more time, his voice thin but sure. And in every photograph catching the edge of the frame, there was the light. My light. The panels in the windows, the colored glass I had made and hung and given away and made again year after year, a whole life told in fractured color. These were not decorations. This was who I was. This was 51 years of my 2 hands and my own breath, and Britt wanted to sweep all of it into a back room so it would not clutter her photographs. I closed the album, and that was when I noticed it sitting on the corner of the table where Britt had set her bag down and forgotten it in her hurry to leave. A glossy catalog, thick and expensive, the cover a soft wash of neutral tones. Hollow and pine it read across the top in thin, elegant letters. Heritage Collection. I do not know what made me open it. I had never much cared about my daughter-in-law's business. But I turned back the cover and the breath went out of me all at once as if I had been struck. There, filling page after glossy page, were my ornaments. Not ornaments like mine. Mine. The blown glass star with the 6 uneven points I had designed the year Corinne was born, because a perfect star had felt like a lie, and an uneven one felt like a family. The nativity panel with the amber light behind the manger that I had spent 3 winters perfecting. The river green teardrops, the frosted bells, the whole language of shapes I had been speaking with my hands for half a century. Photographed beautifully, priced in dollars, and beneath each one in that same thin, elegant font a single line. Designed by Britt Calloway, artisan and founder. I sat very still for a long time. The furnace clicked on and off. A snowplow scraped past somewhere down the street. I looked at my own life laid out on those pages under another woman's name sold to strangers who would never know whose breath had shaped the glass, and I felt something I had not felt in the 2 long gray years since I buried my husband. Not grief, not that old useless ache. Something hot and clear and steady rising up through the middle of me like light through colored glass. Britt thought I was too old to matter. She thought my work was clutter and my traditions were dated and my hands were past their prime. She had built her whole shining career on the back of my life's work and signed her own name to it, and then she had walked into the room where I made that work and told me to go sit quietly in the back so I would not spoil the picture. I picked up my phone. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. The first call I made was to my daughter Corinne in Chicago, then to my oldest son Nate out in Montana, then to my sister Louise down in Arizona, and to a few others besides. And to each one I said the same thing, calm and even. I am calling to let you know that Christmas at my house is canceled this year. Not moved, not changed. Canceled. I will explain everything when you get here. Then I did the second thing, the thing that mattered more. I still kept in the flat file drawer beneath my workbench. The folder Warren had made me start keeping decades ago, back when a gallery owner tried to sell a panel of mine without asking. In it were my dated sketchbooks going back to the 1970s, the registration papers for the designs I had filed years earlier when the church commissioned my big nativity window, and every record proving that the shapes in that glossy catalog had come out of my head and my hands, and no one else's. I sat down at Warren's workbench in the studio he built with his own 2 hands, so that mine would always have a place to make light, and I wrote a plain, firm letter demanding that Britt cease using my designs at once. I addressed it to her, and I dated it the 22nd of December, 3 days before her buyer was due to arrive. I turned off my phone and set it face down on the bench like something that had done its work. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and steady over Cedar Glen. And for the first time since Warren's hand had gone still in mine, I did not feel old or tired or in the way. I felt like a woman who had spent 51 years learning exactly how much pressure a thing can take before it breaks, and exactly where to place the cut. The letter reached her faster than I expected. I had sent it to the same email address printed on the back of that glossy catalog, and I suppose a woman whose whole life runs through her phone does not go long without checking it. It was not yet 4 in the afternoon when I heard a car come up my street too fast, tires slipping on the packed snow, and then the hard slam of a door. Through the front window, I watched Britt come up my walk, the way a storm comes up the river, her cream coat flapping open her boots, throwing snow with every step. Theo scrambled out of the passenger side behind her phone pressed to his ear, one hand raised as though he could hold the whole afternoon still by wanting it badly enough. She did not knock. She still had my spare key, and she used it throwing the door open so hard it cracked against the wall. "Joelle," she said, and her careful polish was gone, stripped clean down to something raw. "What have you done?" I was sitting at the dining table where I had been sitting all afternoon, the albums closed, my hands folded on top of them. Calm in a way that surprised even me. "I did exactly what you told me to do, Britt," I said. I stepped back. I let the younger one take over. She came into the dining room fast, Theo trailing behind her, looking like a man who had wandered into the wrong house. "You sent me a cease and desist letter 3 days before the most important meeting of my life," she said, her voice climbing. "Do you have any idea what you have done? My whole collection, my launch, everything is built around the heritage line. If those pieces come off the table, there is no line. There is no meeting." "I know," I said quietly. She stopped. I think it was the quiet that stopped her more than the words. "You knew," she repeated. "Then you did this on purpose, to sabotage me, to punish me for one conversation." "I did not do anything, Britt," I said. "I only asked you to stop selling my work under your name. Everything else that falls apart from there is yours to answer for." Her jaw tightened. "Those are traditional designs," she said, and I could hear her reaching for the story she had already told herself 100 times. "A star, a manger, bells. These are Christmas shapes, Joelle. Nobody owns them. Every artisan in the country is working with the same vocabulary. You cannot copyright a nativity." I stood then slowly, and I walked to the flat file drawer beneath the workbench, and I brought back the folder that Warren had made me start keeping 30 years before, when a gallery owner in Minneapolis had tried the very same argument. I laid it open on the dining table in front of her. On top were my sketchbooks, the pages soft with age. Each drawing dated in my own hand, the 6-point star with its deliberate uneven arms, sketched out in the winter of 1980, with a note in the margin that read, "For the baby coming," made it crooked so it would look like us. Beneath that were the registration papers I had filed years earlier when the church on Vine Street commissioned the big nativity window, and Warren said a body ought to protect what she makes. "Britt," I said, "I did not make these designs last year. I made them before you were born. The church window has been hanging over that altar for decades, photographed in the town paper, seen by every soul who has walked in those doors. And my name is on the record as the one who drew it. And there is not a single piece of paper anywhere in this world where I signed those designs over to you or to anyone else, because I never did." She looked down at the sketchbooks, at the dates, at my handwriting from before she was a girl. And for the first time since I had known her, Britt Calloway had nothing to say. The silence stretched. Then Theo, who had been standing frozen by the door, spoke. "Britt," he said, "is this true? Did you use Mom's designs?" She turned on him. "It is not that simple," she snapped. "I adapted them. I brought them to a modern audience. Do you know how many hours I put into building that brand while she sat out here playing with glass?" "Playing," I said softly, and she flinched at her own word. Theo looked at his mother and then at his wife, and I watched something shift in his face. Some old certainty coming loose. He did not say anything more. But he did not defend her either, and in that house on that afternoon, his silence toward her felt like the first honest thing he had done in years. Britt gathered herself, snatched her bag off the table where she had left it that morning, and I saw her notice the catalog gone from where she had dropped it, and understand that I had seen it, all of it. "This is not over," she said. "I have contracts. I have a buyer arriving Christmas morning. I will not let a bitter old woman burn down everything I have built." She swept out, and Theo lingered a moment, his hand on the doorframe, his mouth opening and closing, on words that would not come. Then he followed her, because he always followed her, and the door shut, and I was alone again with my albums and my glass and the long blue dark coming down over the snow. I did not stay alone for long. My family, it turned out, did not need much explaining before they came. Corinne was the first to reach me on the phone that same night, her voice already sharp with the kind of fury only my daughter could carry. She was my middle child, my only girl, and she had come out of the womb feeling everything twice as hard as anyone else. "Mom," she said, "I am on the first flight out of Chicago in the morning. Do not let that woman back in the house. Do not sign anything. Do not so much as make her a cup of coffee. I am bringing Gwen. You remember Gwen from my firm days? She does intellectual property. She does exactly this. Mom, are you eating? Have you had water?" I could hear her already moving through her apartment opening drawers, and I let my daughter fuss over me across 1,000 miles because it was easier than telling her I had not eaten since breakfast. Nate called an hour after that, and I could hear the road under his truck before he even spoke. He was my oldest, 46 now, steady as a foundation stone, 2 tours behind him, and a quiet that had come home with him from overseas. "Mom," he said, "I am already driving. I will be there tomorrow afternoon." He did not say much else. He never did. But somewhere out on a dark highway between Montana and Minnesota, my son was pushing through the night to get to me, and that said everything he could not. My sister Louise reached me last, and she reached me loud. Louise was 76, 5 years older than me, and she had spent our entire childhood standing between me and anyone foolish enough to trouble her baby sister. 70 years had not softened her one bit. "Joelle," she said, "that girl told you that you were too old. In the room your Warren built for you with his own 2 hands. I am flying into Minneapolis first thing, and I am bringing enough luggage to stay a month, and that daughter-in-law of yours is about to learn exactly what happens when you cross a woman from our family." I told her she did not have to come. She hung up on me, which was Louise, for I am already packing. They arrived the next day, the 23rd, one after another, into a house that filled with noise and warmth for the first time since Warren passed. Corinne came through my door and had me in her arms before I could get a word out, her red hair wild from the flight her friend Gwen a step behind her, carrying a leather folder and a careful, watchful calm. Nate rolled in that afternoon road, worn and unshaven, and folded me into a hug so long that I felt him breathe out something he had been holding the whole drive. Louise swept in with 2 enormous suitcases and immediately declared that no one in this family had eaten a proper meal in days, and set about proving it in my kitchen. And through all of it, my neighbor Marjorie kept appearing at the door with covered dishes, a hot pan of scalloped potatoes, a loaf still warm from her oven, and word from up and down the street that half of Cedar Glen had heard some version of what happened and had decided firmly that they were on my side. We gathered around the dining table that evening, and Gwen laid out her folder and looked at my sketchbooks and my registration papers for a long quiet while her lawyer's eyes moving over the dates. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said at last, "I want to be careful not to promise you the sky, but from what I am seeing here, you are in a very strong position. These works are yours. You created them, you have decades of dated evidence, you registered the key designs, and you never assigned your rights. That means Britt has been reproducing and selling your original work without any license at all. That is infringement plainly. And it is not only that she has to stop." She looked up at me. Mom Corinne said gently, "Tell her about the money." I frowned. "There is no money. It was never about money." Gwen turned a page in her folder. "Mrs. Hartwell, it may not have started as being about money, but I have spent the afternoon looking at what is public about Hollow and Pine, and that Heritage Line is the engine of the whole company. Britt has built her revenue, her wholesale interest, this national deal she is chasing all of it on top of your designs. When someone profits from work that is not theirs, the law does not only ask them to stop, it can require them to hand over the profits they made from it. Every dollar she has earned off your star and your nativity and your bells, that is money that was made on your back." She let that settle. "She owes you, Mrs. Hartwell. Not as a favor, as a matter of law." I sat with that for a moment, not because I wanted anything of Britt's, but because for 2 years I had felt useless, a burden managed by a family too kind to say so. And here was my daughter and her lawyer telling me that the work of my 2 hands had built an empire, and that the empire was by rights mine. That is a strange thing to learn at 71, that you were valuable all along, that they only pretended you were not because it was cheaper. It was near 9 that night, the kitchen still warm with Louise's cooking and the low sound of Nate and Corinne talking in the next room, when my phone rang with a number I did not know. I almost let it go, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Hartwell," a woman's voice said, warm and unhurried. My name is Deborah Vaughn. You do not know me, but I believe you know my work in a manner of speaking. I am a buyer. I was scheduled to fly to Minnesota on Christmas morning to see a collection presented by a company called Hollow and Pine. My heart went cold and still. This was it, I thought. The call from the important woman phoning to tell me I had ruined everything with my wounded pride. Mrs. Vaughn, I said carefully, I am sure Britt has explained. She tried to, Deborah said, and I heard the dry edge under her warmth. She called me a few hours ago, quite upset, to reassure me that a family disagreement would not affect the presentation. She spent a good deal of that call telling me about her difficult mother-in-law. And I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Hartwell, the more she talked, the less I liked what I was hearing. I did not understand yet. What do you mean, I said. Deborah Vaughn was quiet for a moment. 12 years ago, she said, I bought a stained glass panel from a small gallery in Minneapolis. A river green field with a crooked little star set into the corner, 6 points, all of them uneven, the loveliest wrong thing I ever saw. It has hung in my front hall ever since. It is signed on the back edge, very small. J. Hartwell. When Britt Calloway sent me the lookbook for her heritage collection last month, I sat in my office and I felt something turn over in my stomach because I was looking at that same crooked star and that same green. And it was not signed J. Hartwell anymore. It was signed by her. I told myself I was imagining it. And then today she called me to complain about her elderly mother-in-law, a glass artist out here in this same little river town, and Mrs. Hartwell I stopped imagining. I could not speak. Across the room, Corinne had gone still, watching my face. I am not in the business of putting stolen work on shelves, Deborah went on. It is wrong, and it is a liability, and frankly, it is beneath me. So I will not be flying out to see Hollow and Pine present your designs as their own. But I would very much like, when all of this has quieted, to talk with the woman who actually made that crooked star. Because I have spent 12 years telling people it is the finest thing in my house, and I have been giving the credit to the wrong name, and I would like to fix that. Then more gently, you are not in the wrong here, Mrs. Hartwell. I want you to know that. Whatever that young woman told you about being too old or too dated or too much trouble, a person does not do the work you have done and become worthless with age. She becomes rare. When I finally set the phone down, my hands were shaking, but not with fear, and the tears on my face were not the gray tears I had grown used to. Corinne crossed to me and knelt down. Mom, she said. What is it? I told them. All of it. Deborah Vaughn. The panel in her front hall, the crooked star she had loved for 12 years under the wrong name, the deal that would not be happening on Christmas morning after all. And I watched my family's faces change, watched Nate's jaw set, and Louise's chin lift and Corinne's eyes fill, and I understood that the tide had turned, and that I had not turned it by being pitiful or by begging. I had turned it by being, after 51 years, exactly who I was. Gwen closed her folder slowly. Mrs. Hartwell, she said, I think it is time we invited Britt and Theo to come and sit down with all of us. Everything together. The sketchbooks, the registration, and now Ms. Vaughn. I think your daughter-in-law needs to understand plainly in front of the people who love you what she is actually facing. Nate was already reaching for his phone. I will tell Theo, he said. Tell them tomorrow, Christmas Eve. Here, in this house, where it started. I looked around my dining room at the table that had held 41 Christmases at the colored light, sleeping in the dark windows at my sister and my children, and the good stranger next door who kept leaving bread on my step. And I thought of Britt sitting in her styled and curated house in Birchwood Ridge, believing right up until the last that a woman my age could be moved aside like a chair. Yes, I said, tell them to come. I believe it is time we all sat down and talked about what a family really is. They came to my house on Christmas Eve in the last blue hour before dark, when the snow on the river had gone the color of a bruise healing. Louise had arranged us before they arrived, the way a woman arranges a room she means to be taken seriously in. She sat me in Warren's old chair, the deep one by the window, where he had read the paper every evening of our marriage, and where no one had sat since he died. You are the matriarch of this family, Joelle, she said, planting me in it with a firm hand on my shoulder. Sit like it. Corinne stood at my right and Nate at my left, and Gwen sat a little apart with her leather folder closed on her knee, and Louise stood behind my chair like a woman guarding a queen. I told them it was too much that this was still my son coming home, but no one listened to me, and I confess that when the headlights swung into the driveway, I was glad of the people around me. Britt came in first, and Theo behind her, and they stopped short in the doorway when they saw us. Britt had rebuilt her polish overnight. Her hair was smooth again, her coat immaculate, but there were cracks in her now that no amount of care could paper over a tightness at the corners of her mouth, a brightness in her eyes that was closer to panic than to confidence. Theo looked as though he had not slept at all, hollow and gray, his hands pushed deep in his pockets. "This looks like an ambush," Britt said. "It looks like a family," Louise answered. "Sit down." Britt sat on the edge of the sofa across from me, her back very straight, and Theo lowered himself beside her, and I noticed that she reached for his hand and that he let her take it, though he did not close his fingers around hers. Gwen opened her folder. She laid out the sketchbooks, first the dated pages, my handwriting from 1980. She laid out the registration papers. She spoke plainly and without heat, the way I imagine she spoke in courtrooms, and she said that Mrs. Hartwell was the sole creator of the designs, that there was decades of dated evidence that no rights had ever been transferred, and that Hollow and Pine had been reproducing and selling protected work without a license. Then she said the last thing quietly. "And I received a call yesterday evening from Deborah Vaughn, the buyer you were expecting tomorrow. She recognized Mrs. Hartwell's work on site. She will not be coming. She will not carry the collection. I am sorry to be the one to tell you, but there is no launch." For a moment, Britt did not move at all. Then she did the thing I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. She reached into her own bag and she drew out a single sheet of paper, crisp and official, and she held it up like a woman holding up a shield. "Before you all decide I am a thief," she said, her voice shaking only a little, "you should know that I have this. It is an assignment of design rights, signed by Joelle. 2 years ago, right after Warren passed, she gave me permission to use and develop her patterns for my business. She signed it. It is right here. I have every legal right to those designs." She was breathing hard. She looked around the room at each of us, daring us to call her a liar with a document in her hand. Gwen reached for it, but I said, "No, let me." And Nate carried it to me, and I held that paper in my 2 hands, and I looked at it in the lamplight. It was a real enough page, the kind of thing a person can print off the internet in 10 minutes. And at the bottom on the signature line was a name, Joelle Hartwell, in blue ink, in a looping, confident hand. And it was not mine. I have signed my name perhaps 1,000,000 times in 71 years. I know the shape of it the way I know my own face in the mirror. I have a small hitch in the J, a place where my hand catches, because I broke that wrist as a girl, and it never healed clean. My J does not loop. My J stumbles. This J on this page swept out smooth and proud and whole, the J of a woman who had never broken anything in her life. "Theo," I said quietly, and I held the paper out to my son. "Come here. Look at your mother's name." He came and knelt in front of me and took the page, and I watched him read it. I watched his eyes go to the signature and stop there. Theo had signed 100 Christmas cards beside me. He had watched me sign checks at this very table, watched my hand catch on the J since he was a boy. He knew. I saw the exact moment he knew. "This is not your signature," he said. His voice was very flat. "Mom, this is not your signature." Theo Britt started, but he stood up and turned to face her, still holding the page, and something in the way he moved made her stop. "When did I sign this, Mom?" he said, not looking away from his wife. 2 years ago, right after Dad died. Do you remember what those weeks were like?" "I do. I remember you could not get out of bed. I remember Corinne flew in and I could not." I told myself I was too busy with work, and I have hated myself for that ever since. "You did not sign a single thing in those weeks that Corinne did not put in front of you." He turned the page toward Britt. "So when did she sign this? Where? Who watched her do it?" Britt's mouth opened. It was she said. She agreed to it. Verbally. I had to put something on paper for the lawyers. Everyone does that. It is just a formality. "You forged my mother's name." Theo said it very quietly, and quiet from Theo was a thing none of us had ever heard. "You took her designs, you built your whole company on them, you signed your own name to her work and sold it to strangers, and when she finally caught you, you forged her signature on a legal document to cover it." He was shaking now. She was grieving my father. She could not stand up. "And you were in her house going through her drawers." "It is not," Britt said, and her polish shattered all at once the way glass does all at once and completely. Do not you dare put this on me. Everything I did for us, for our family, for this life we are building, which is more than she flung a hand at me, more than she ever gave you, sitting out here in her little glass room while I made something of us. And I am not going to lose it. I am not going to lose everything to a bitter old woman and her lawyers and her whole family lined up against me. So you decide right now, Theo, right now, me and our children and everything we have built, or her. You cannot have both. The room was so quiet I could hear the snow ticking against the window. My son looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he looked at me in Warren's chair with my broken wrist and my crooked J and 51 years of light behind me. And then he set the forged page down on the coffee table between them, very gently, the way you set down something you are done carrying. I should have chosen my mother in the studio 3 days ago, he said. I should have chosen her every day for the last 10 years, and I did not because I was a coward, and it was easier to let you decide who we were. Dad would be ashamed of me. He is not here to say it, so I have to say it for him. He took a breath that shook the whole of him. I choose her, and I choose our children knowing what is right. And I am not doing this anymore, Britt. Any of it. Britt stared at him as though he had struck her. She waited, I think, for him to fold the way he always had. And when he did not, when he only stood there meeting her eyes with a spine none of us had ever seen in him, her face went cold and closed. Fine, she said. She stood, snatched the forged page off the table, and I heard Gwen say mildly, I would leave that here if I were you. And I watched Britt's hand freeze and then set it back down. Fine, she said again, thinner now. Enjoy your traditions. Enjoy your crooked little star. She went to the door and turned back once, and for a moment I thought she might say something to Theo or to the children who were not in the room, but she only looked at all of us lined up against her and could not find the person she had been when she walked in. Then she was gone out into the snow, and her car pulled away too fast, and the sound of it faded down toward the river, and was gone too. Theo sank onto the sofa and put his face in his hands and wept the way I had not seen him weep since he was small. I got up out of Warren's chair on legs that did not feel old at all now, and I sat beside my son and pulled him into my arms the way I had when the world was too big for him, and he cried into my shoulder 42 years old, and finally home. You did the right thing, I told him. It took you a long while, but you did it, and that is what matters. He filed the papers 3 days after Christmas. Minnesota does not ask a person to prove fault to end a marriage only to say that the thing is broken, past mending, and it was. Gwen explained it all to us in her calm way. The brand that Britt had built was in the eyes of the law a marital asset half his by rights. But a brand built on infringed designs and propped up with a forged assignment was not worth what Britt had told the banks it was worth, and the moment the truth of it was known, its value fell away like snow off a warm roof. Britt kept what was left of it, and the debts that came with it, and she settled with me quietly on paper this time, in ink that was truly signed, returning every design that was mine, and paying back a portion of what she had made from them. I never asked the county to charge her for forging my name. I could have. Gwen said the case was plain, but she was still the mother of my grandchildren, and I had buried enough this year without burying whatever was left of their family too. So I let the forgery be the thing that ended her hold on us, and I let it go at that, and I have never once been sorry. We had Christmas the next day, the real one in my house, the way it was meant to be. They came all through Christmas morning, the whole tribe of them, snow squeaking under boots on the front walk. Nate with his wife Dana and their 2 long-legged teenagers who ate everything in sight. Corinne with her husband Russell and their little ones, and Louise who had unpacked exactly none of her month of luggage and declared she might just move in. Theo came with Piper and baby Jonah, and no Britt, and Piper ran to me the moment she was through the door and wrapped both arms around my waist. Grandma, she said, Daddy said Christmas is at your house after all. Can I still put the star on top? It is her job every year. It has been since she could stand. Of course you can, sweetheart, I said. Nobody else is allowed to touch it. The house filled with noise and light. I had hung my glass back in every window before they came the panels Warren had framed in his own good wood, and the low winter sun came pouring through and threw color across the floors and the walls and the faces of my family. Ruby and amber and that deep river green so that the whole house was lit from the inside like something alive. On the tree hung the ornaments I had blown with my own breath, the frosted bells, the teardrops, and when it came time, Nate lifted Piper up in his strong arms, and she reached and set the crooked 6-point star on the very top. The one I made the winter Corinne was coming, made it wrong on purpose, so it would look like us. It caught the light, and it was perfect, which is to say it was not perfect at all, which is the only kind of perfect a family ever gets. We sat down to eat, all 16 of us, at the long table that had held 41 Christmases and now held another. Before we ate, Nate stood as he had every year since his father passed to say the grace. But this year he added something. "We are thankful for Mom," he said, and he looked down the table at me until I had to look at my plate. For her hands and her strength, and for teaching us that some things family and tradition and a person's own dignity are worth fighting for, even when your knees are old and your J does not loop right anymore. We were reminded this week that getting older does not make a person worth less. It makes them the thing everything else is built on. To Mom they said all of them, even Piper with her cup of milk, and I let myself cry, and for once they were not the gray tears of the last 2 years. They were the other kind. It is late June now as I tell you this, and my studio windows are open to the summer river, and the light coming through my glass falls warm across the workbench where I am blowing a run of new stars. The divorce was finished last month, quietly the way I wanted it. Theo comes every Sunday sometimes with Piper and Jonah, sometimes alone just to sit with me and talk. And this spring he brought someone new, a woman named Annie, who teaches the 3rd grade over in the next county, and who calls me Miss Joelle and means it warm. She sat in my studio for an hour last week and asked me how the glass gets its color, and she listened to the whole answer, which is more than I can say for the woman who came before. Deborah Vaughn kept her word. She flew out to Cedar Glen in the spring and sat in this very studio and held the crooked star up to the window and cried a little the way people do when a thing they love turns out to have a name after all. She is carrying a line now, a real one in stores across the country, and every piece of it is signed the way it should be. J. Hartwell. The money from it, more money than I ever thought these hands would make, I have put mostly into a trust for the grandchildren, for Piper and Jonah and all of them, so that the light I made will pay for their schooling long after I am glass myself. Some small part of it I spent on a new furnace for the studio and on a proper headstone for Warren, that I had been too broke and too heartbroken to buy one with a little pane of colored glass set into the granite so the sun comes through it in the afternoons. I am 71 years old, and I am not afraid anymore of being called too old, because I have learned that age is not a thing that is taken from you. It is a thing that accumulates like color in glass, layer over layer, until the light that comes through you is deeper and stranger and more beautiful than anything a young and empty pane could ever hold. My daughter-in-law told me I was too old to matter, and she signed my name to my own life and tried to sell it back to the world as hers. So I stood up at 71 in the studio my husband built, and I reminded her and my son and myself of one plain thing. You can copy a shape. You can steal a design. You can even forge a signature in a smooth and confident hand. But the light itself, the light a person makes with her own 2 hands over a whole long life that you cannot sign your name to, that was always and will always be only mine.